I would, use candy, as a pleasure, as a sensation, and I would buy my friends with my candy.
So would you say addiction pretty much started before the use of drugs?
Yes, I'm a firm believer that drugs is just a symptom of addiction. Because when you ask the question about addiction, there's three things that make up addiction: obsession and compulsion. Obsession is the mental part of addiction, okay? That fixed idea that every time I think, you can't think about anything else but what you're thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Take shopping, for example.
Yeah.
You have people that's addicted to shopping. You have people
Guilty.
that's the people that's addicted to food. You have people that's addicted to gambling. So addiction involves much more than a mere chemical substance. The problem with addiction, which makes diagnosing and treating it difficult, is because only the individual can say whether or not they have addiction. And addiction is a disease. Based on the American Medical Association, the disease model is primary, progressive, chronic, fatal, if not treated. But it is treatable, and it can be arrested at some point. And recovery is then possible. Addicted people treat their addiction by not using. Just like the diabetic.
Mm-hmm.
Diabetic craves sugar and salt,
Right.
but they're not supposed to have it. Addicts crave drugs and alcohol.
Okay, yeah. That's a good analogy. How did your addiction affect your relationships with, like, parents and relatives?
Well, addiction is a relationship with a substance. However, my relationship with my drugs became more important than any other relationship in my life.
Wow.
It became more important than any value in my life. I was more interested in using, and finding ways and means to get some more. So therefore, I lacked the ability, because of the self-centered nature, the total self-centeredness of addiction, when it doesn't allow you to see past how you're thinking, you're feeling, and you can't see past your wants and your desires. So naturally, you become so selfish, so self-centered, that you can't see past how you're thinking and feeling to have any empathy, compassion, or consideration for anyone else. So naturally, it would affect any meaningful relationships that you would have. Actually, it took all relationships, because it didn't allow for me to have a relationship even with myself or with my higher power.
What do you mean by higher power?
Well, my higher power is whom I choose to call the God of my understanding. Or some people feel as though addiction is a violent, destructive power greater than them. And if that's the case, they needed to come to believe in a loving and caring power that was greater than their addiction, which is a violent, destructive power,
Mm-hmm.
which is found in 12-step programs and in treatment. New information can be a power greater than the limited amount of information a person has about addiction. Limits their ability to do anything about it. So education becomes key in treating addicted persons. They need to first learn about addiction, because addiction knows everything about them and they know nothing about it.
Yeah. So you mentioned 12 steps. Is that how you were treated and got through it?
12-step fellowship programs is a program for daily recovery. Addiction is a chronic illness for which there is no known cure. However, as I stated, it can be arrested at some point and recovery becomes possible through developing social skills, emotional skills, and cognitive skills, because it's a biopsychosocial disorder. The bio is the physical, the psycho is the mental, and the social part is the spiritual part of the addiction, which is the total self-centeredness. So we have to address the whole person, not just the uncontrollable drug use. The uncontrollable drug use is just a symptom of addiction. Addiction is is a mental, physical, and spiritual disorder that affects every area of an individual's life. What addiction and how it affects every area of your life?
Yeah.
Because you're not just a human being, you are also, or you're not just a physical being, you're also a spiritual being. And the spiritual part is the first thing that goes from an individual when they use a substance. And this is why we say it's a spirit, okay? Even back in the Indian tribal times, when the Indians were given alcohol, when they took over the land from the Indians, they gave them blankets and alcohol, and they call it fire water. Because it was a mind-altering substance. And it was able to it was able to put people outside of themselves so that they couldn't function properly.
Right.
But back to it being affecting all areas is mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So treatment has to be a holistic approach so that it can address all areas. And as I stated, the spirit is the first thing that goes when you put a substance in you, but it's the last thing to come back through the recovery process. The physical comes back when people stop using, they gain their weight, their skin clear up, they diet change. So naturally, they get the proper nutrition when they stop using. Then the mental part, when they educate themselves about addiction, their thinking clears up. Physically, their body clear up. Mentally, their mind clear up. Emotionally, they develop how to handle crisis better, stress better, life, the stress of work, the stress of school, the stress of family, which is a natural part of life. They lack the coping skills, and drugs and alcohol become a way for people to cope. And it being poor coping skills is the only coping mechanism that they have. So they have to be, some people have to be rehabilitated. To be rehabilitated or be rehabbed is to get back something which was lost. But you have people that need to become habilitated, which they never was taught and learned to be responsible or to have social skills or emotional skills. They never had them. So it's not always rehab that's needed. Sometimes some people need habilitation, not rehabilitation. So we have to meet people where they are and not assume that rehab is going to work for everybody, because it's not always about rehab. It's about teaching people skills that they may have never had. And that's what recovery offers through the 12 steps.
What's up? Thank you so much for your time.
Mm-hmm.
We'll surely get your message out there. And I Appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.